It's always interesting to see companies branch out from what they normally do. Granted, NIS has been branching out for the past few years to a point where their only real current staple series they have is Disgaea, and for being known for having some needlessly complex system in some of their games. Unfortunately, this review isn't about the marriage of these two things, as Disgaea in some ways can be considered complex on its own right. Instead, this is about NIS adding needlessly complex systems to a genre they're unfamiliar with. Dungeon role-playing games, or DRPGs for short, are games that take place in nothing but dungeons. They're typically done in a first-person view. The dungeon maps are usually tile-based, and you yourself have to fill it out by walking over each tile. And then lastly, depending on the type of story, you can either have characters you make for yourself as the story is non-existent, or there's a set of characters for you to use as the story is the main focus. Labyrinth of Refrain Coven of Dusk, in an interesting way, actually checks off all of these boxes, even the last bit that diverges into two. By all means, the overview of this game is very by the book in terms of overall design. So let's look at the design of this game from the very beginning and start at the story. The story of Coven is a tale of two cities. On the surface, Coven takes place in the town Refrain, a town basically in the middle of nowhere. You, your master, an easily irritable witch with a weak constitution and a prosthetic leg, Dronia, and a little annoying girl, Luca, travel to the town of Refrain after hearing of the town's well. Well, that and the fact the mayor asked Dronia to explore it and give him all the valuable items inside of it. Of course, in some DRPGs, that would be the end of it. Sure, it starts off as nothing, but it certainly turns into something rather quickly as the town has some very interesting secrets. Especially for one where witches aren't all that well liked and aren't welcomed. I did mention that this is a tale of two cities, and so the second tale is, well, the well itself. You see, the well is filled with all sorts of nasty miasma, and monsters so humans wouldn't survive while exploring the place. Therefore, it's up to you, a non-human, to explore the well in Dronia's place. Each part of this massive labyrinth has sort of a mini story to tell in each stage. These stories and whatever items you pick up are reported back to Dronia per her request. I know just a moment ago I called you a non-human, but in all actuality, you're just a book. So whatever thoughts that you have and what you played as before can be laid to rest. Although if it helps, you do have the soul of a person who traveled the labyrinth before you. But again, you're a book, so fighting is a no-go. Instead, you have puppets to fight for you. It's the creation of these puppets is where the madness truly begins of this game. You start out with 6 classes. They are your all-around knight, an assassin who strikes heavily and quickly, a wall of impenetrable defenses, a general magic user, a magic user that can also deal physical damage, and lastly, a status abuser. Unless you truly know what you're doing, making a puppet is information overload in the beginning. Making a name, nickname, and even making the flavor text for the character are simple enough. Choosing the appearance and voice of the character is easy as well. The hard part is choosing the puppet's nature. This isn't as simple as Pokemon where we're dealing with only 2 stats, changing in a simple 10% in one stat and negative 10% in another one. In the case of Coven, we're dealing with 8 stats potentially being modified in one way or another, and how each one of these 15 natures affect your puppets varies for each class. There is no default nature to fall back on, and none of them are overly positive. They all even out in some way or another. Now that you've decided on the puppet's nature, it's time to decide the puppet's preferred stat growth. This is different from choosing the nature only because the game wants to know what stats you really want to grow, and what stats that you really want to ignore. This option ultimately comes in 3 flavors. Natural is letting your puppet sort of be an all-arounder type character, or at least the best the class would let it. Flat is where your puppet dabbles in a bit of their strengths at the cost of some of their stats deteriorating. Lastly, Sharp is similar to Flat, but on steroids. Unlike your nature, which can only be changed by reading books, this can be changed at any time. We're not done in deciding how you want to build your unit just yet. Now it's time to talk about stances. Stances is a simple plus and minus like in Pokemon. Standard stance means nothing changes. A Sun stance is a defensive stance, so you get higher HP and defense with lesser magic. The other main trade-off is that enemies are more prone to attacking this unit. As you can imagine, the Moon stance improves offense. Expect higher magical and physical output, but at the cost of lower defense, HP, and your luck stat. So good luck if you choose to go with that one. The last few things to consider, your character starts off with 2 skills, and you get a pool of skills to choose the third one. Finally, just to tantalize you even more, it's time to pick your lucky number. It does something, you'll just never know what it does or does not do. Now that you've chosen to build your puppets the way you want them, or press random to bypass the whole process, it's time to make a pack of your puppets called a Coven. These Covens also provide bonus stats and also help dictate what skills or magic your puppets will have as they go through the Labyrinth. Depending on the Coven, you can have up to 3 attackers and 5 supporters ready to go. Due to the fact that you have 5 slots available to you, you can potentially send up to 40 puppets down at once. As mentioned earlier, the Labyrinth is tile-based, and as you walk across the dungeon, you'll be filling up your map. While the Labyrinth is littered with treasure, it's chock full of all sorts of craziness. There are pitfalls that send you to the next floor, but also cause a lot of damage. Traps that cause random statuses as well as cause damage when stepped on. There are also unmappable rooms, and of course, enemies. Traveling is a bit of a slog at first, but as the game progresses you're able to make witch packs, provided you find enough mana in the dungeon. Dronia will reward you with buffs such as the ability to hide from enemies, creating your own way up using warp points, or creating formations in battles, and etc. While battles are turn-based, there are so many hidden subsystems at work. It's hard to describe them all, although there are some important ones to consider. You see, your puppets will seem to have some form of sentience as they're able to build some form of rapport with each other. The closer they get, and the more they bond with each other, the more they resonate. Resonance happens when one teammate goes after another and they have some sort of relationship. This increases the attack power of that attack. The same sort of goes with magic attacks. No rapport is needed, but instead it is just a simple act of one magic attack going after another. The more magic attacks going on at once, the higher the chain in the attacks may be. Be careful however, as enemies are also able to take advantage of this as well. The last main thing to touch upon in regards to battles are gore hits. Gore hits are the best form of critical hits in the game. Not only does it cause massive damage, it also causes lowered stats, including permanently lowered health as well. Note that this can happen to you as well. These are all puppets after all, and puppets do break. They can also be put back together again, but until you do, be careful traversing the dungeon. Once you're done traversing a dungeon, if you make it back alive, the game gives you a bonus 20% experience to whatever you gained. You also keep the mana you've gained too. If you give up in a dungeon or lose in a fight, the game will punish you by reducing the amount of mana you received, and potentially losing one of the limbs of your puppets. Once you're back in the main hub area, there are a few things you can do. Outside of witch reports, which continues the story, you can enhance your items via using alchemy, turn in items from doing side quests, and of course enhancing yourself as mentioned earlier, which makes the game more enjoyable all around. If there's anything that this game wants from you, it's that you understand what's happening in it. Throughout the dungeons, the game is also filled with tip markers, sometimes providing very useful information the game wouldn't have stated otherwise. Others may just be simple reminders on something you've learned from the tutorial earlier. But that's not all either. The map is, if not the most important tool when traversing. Obviously, yes, it'll show you where you are, but as well as the map of the entire area, but most importantly, it'll tell you where the breakable walls are. By the game's own design, there are many times where you'll come across a door that needs a key, but the wall next to it is breakable so you can still get to the next area. Granted, it'll just be an extra step in the process. When it comes to graphics, don't expect anything like a graphical powerhouse. The game has some really nice 2D art for sure. The character designs for the most part are great, while the labyrinths themselves look nice. It's pretty cheaply made, so don't complain if this game isn't pushing your PS4, let alone your Switch in handheld mode. The game's music certainly doesn't detract from the game, albeit doesn't really add much either. Coven to me is a weird game. When it was out in Japan, I heard it was a great game, but the ending result is nothing short of something masterful. The game is as deep as you want it to be. If you want the game to only have epic tier items and upwards to show, it can do that for you. Mob enemies can generally be beaten by just doing regular attacks. No real thought has to be put into the fight. Naturally, real thought does have to be put into the boss battles. If you aren't thinking 2 steps ahead, you're in trouble. Ultimately speaking, my feelings for Coven can't really be summed up in a simple like or love. It is something more akin to respect. Despite everything being needlessly complex, it's done in a way that makes the game much more enjoyable rather than bogging it down. When Coven came out on Vita back in 2016, it was and still is considered one of the best games on the platform. If the Vita version made it west, it would easily be the game of the year on the platform with no issue. With it being on a different platform, that is not the case here. However, for their first time doing a game like this, one might have thought that NIS has been making DRPGs for years due to the amount of polish that is presented here. While I don't necessarily like all the decisions made in this game, if NIS decides to make another one, I'll be one of the first people to pick it up. And that does it for our review. To see the written review, be sure to check out our website, gaminggamma.com. A link to the site will be down in the description bar below. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments section. I would love to hear from you. And if this is your first time checking out my channel via this review, hey, be sure to stick around and subscribe for future reviews, let's plays, commentaries, and more. And as always everyone, thanks for watching.